A or B?
There is no scientific process for judging art.
Left or right?
A certain amount of that kind of tension is necessary to arrive at a decision that has interrogated all possibilities.
Yes or no?
You really do have to feel the regret and then move on with the decision you've made, as if that had always been the only one.
Welcome to The Art of Deciding with Bruce Whitfield.
Hello, thank you for joining me on The Art of Deciding. It's a podcast where we speak to people who make big decisions and then we ask them to give us just a little bit of insight as to how they do it. I'm Bruce Whitfield, I'm a journalist and speaker, and I interrogate decision makers for a living. I'm trying to discover if making decisions is more of an art or a science. In our recent episode with Professor Robin Dunbar and Sam Rockey, who spoke to us about decision-making in groups, it really seemed like science was winning. They had evidence that proved that some ways of making decisions are better than others. But this time things might be a little bit different. Are you much of a reader? What's on your bedside table or your Kindle at the moment? And when you've finished it, how will you decide what to read next? Recommendations from friends, reviews, book talk even? Or maybe you wait to see what wins prizes, and especially the biggest literary prize of them all, the Booker. It's the one that every author dreams of getting. It means instant global fame, a big cash prize, a leap in sales, and possibly the difference between being a full-time writer and going back to a day job. But who decides who gets all that?
It does start literally with a box of books. And the box of books is incredibly intimidating because it becomes this physical symbol of what you've undertaken to do, which when you think about it and when it is manifested like that, sort of in front of you, starts to feel a bit bonkers. You know, you're going to read more than 150 books in less than a year, and you're going to try to arrive at a decision about which of those books is the best one. According to whose metric? What is the framework for that decision?
Sara Collins started her career as a lawyer and spent the first 17 years of her working life in a big city firm. Now she's a writer. She's won her fair share of prizes, especially for her first book, The Confessions of Franny Langton. It's the story of a Caribbean slave on trial for the murder of her master and mistress. It won the Costa First Novel Award, and Sara later adapted it for television. So she's an author, a screenwriter, reviewer, broadcaster, and no stranger to podcasts. She recently co-presented 6 series of the Graham Norton Book Club and was part of Elizabeth Day's podcast, How to Write a Book. She knows her book stuff, but she wasn't quite prepared for the question that was popped one day late in 2023.
The Booker Foundation CEO, Gabby Wood, invited me out for coffee one chilly afternoon and said, "How would you like to be a Booker judge?" I was really flabbergasted. I'm a lifelong bookworm. I'm an avid lover of books. Even though I am a novelist myself, I still worship novelists like they're superheroes. And so it felt really like being handed the key to a club that I hadn't even imagined I could belong to. So of course I said yes.
So, Sara is in, along with her fellow judges, Chair Edmund Duval, Yi-Yoon Lee, Justine Jordan, and Nitin Sawhney. She's up for being part of the biggest decision of the book world. Who will win the Booker Prize? It's awarded to the best sustained work of fiction written in English and published in the UK and Ireland of the previous year. How do you make a decision about that when a good book means so many different things to different people? With 156 books to read, where do you even start?
Every time a box came, there was a sort of palpable sense of ceremony about taking all of the books out and actually seeing them and holding them, stacking them up. So I thought, I'm going to read in order, and that's as fair as I can be. I'm going to read from beginning to end, and this is a question people always ask, But I felt if my book had been submitted for the Booker, I wouldn't want some tired judge picking it up, reading a paragraph and thinking, oh, I'm hungry, I need my martini, whatever it might be. I just can't be bothered with this, and not really giving it due attention. So I resolved to read every book from beginning to end, to try to give them equal conditions. So, if I was tired, then I would come back to a book when I was fresh, that kind of thing. And the memory that lingers, I think probably as a result of that most strongly from that year, was that feeling of holding the books and of seeing them begin to pile up. They began to colonize my staircase. And so I lived with them, not just inside my head, but, in my house, kind of staring at me as I went up and down. And I felt a huge sense of obligation to them and to their authors to kind of do the process justice.
Somehow you have to objectively assess what is good. And that is, in any form of art, impossible to achieve to everyone's satisfaction.
It does feel a bit overwhelming. And I think the thing that I told myself to settle those nerves was precisely that it could never be an objective decision, that I was about to embark on a process of group decision making, and my contribution to it would have to be my very subjective responses to these books. But I hope that that subjectivity would have been informed by my lifetime of reading, and also by my last sort of decade of writing, but that there is no scientific process for this. There's no scientific process for judging art.
And that's such an important character trait to have, is it not, when you go through a process like this, where that sense of the obligation towards fairness is all you can really offer, isn't it, in that process?
Yes. And, as you said that, it reminded me of my days as a lawyer. That's what a sort of professional judge is doing in my old world, is weighing up usually two sides of something, sometimes more, and trying as diligently as possible not to be influenced by outside considerations or prejudices. I wouldn't say that I tried to be objective, because I was always aware that I was bringing something to the table. What I do as a critic, and possibly what I did as a judge, is resolve to judge each book according to its own criteria. I'd say one of the keys to me for this being what I consider to be a successful decision-making process was that a tone was set right from the outset, where it was safe to be yourself, it was safe to express your views, and it was safe to disagree. And that, I think, really does depend on the chair. In our case, our chair, Edmund Duvall, is both incredibly learned, but also has wonderful discernment. I mean, he would make a good judge. And one of the things he did right at the outset, which I think was very clever, was he sort of leading by example created this really democratic atmosphere. There were no egos, there was no hierarchy. And it really did feel like we could disagree without any sort of introduction of tension or hostility into the discussion, And in fact, it then, I think, affected the process in that people were able to change their opinions about books sometimes. An absolutely essential part of a group decision-making process, I think, that ability to disagree and also to persuade, an openness to being persuaded. And the subjectivity actually was refreshing. I got to know my fellow judges so well, I think precisely because we really were imbuing this process with our beliefs and experiences and life histories. And that made it more valuable. Otherwise, I suppose you could have, an AI panel doing this in the future, and it just would not be the same.
Horrific thought. Let's not go there for a moment. Take me through your own decision-making process in terms of making that transition from law to writing, because unless you are one of the high volume, very popular authors in the world who earn exceptional livings for themselves, from a financial perspective, it's not a logical step to go from a city law career into writing what is so far one very good book, but it is one book, not the series of the John Grisham from the
It's not Lee Child, who I know you've had on the show.
No, he was the machine. He was the child machine. He was. It's a fundamentally different proposition that you're offering, of course.
Yeah. My book did very well, but it, not Jack Reacher levels. I mean, not even scratching Jack Reacher levels. And I don't really ever aspire to do that. It's just a different kind of book and kind of writing that I'm engaged in. But I always tell people this because it's really easy to romanticize these stories of people making these big transitions and, taking big leaps of faith, that I only did that because I had already been a lawyer. I had a lawyer's savings, and I was still at the time married to a lawyer. So I wasn't actually taking a financial leap of faith. And the thing that does irritate me a lot about the literary world is it's impossible to have, for writers anyway, to have any sort of financial security unless and until you become a Lee Child or a Marion Keyes or what have you. And there are barriers to entry because some people can afford to do that and some can't. I was lucky in that I could afford to do it. And as a result, I think I then made a decision. I remember being sort of pushed towards writing by this sense which had always sort of niggled at me that I wanted to do it and I wasn't doing it because I was so busy doing other things. And then by the fact that two of my closest friends, same age as me, both very talented women, died within a year and a half of each other. And I actually remember the afternoon of this shift when the idea that life was short in theory became a real sort of gut punch, reckoning with the idea that life was short. And if I didn't write this book, I was going to regret it. And so it was that decision to sort of turn away from something that people would have felt was much more glamorous and successful and involved wearing better clothes and, stilettos and, flying off to exotic locations with clients, towards something that seemed a bit mad. It was really because I didn't want to end up at the end of my life, however long or short it was, with that regret. I just knew I need to sort of make sure that I can do everything I can to not have that regret. And so that's why I made the decision.
Thank you for choosing The Art of Deciding. We want as many people as possible to hear our amazing range of fascinating guests, including the champion poker player Liv Boeree, West End Back to the Future the musical producer Colin Ingram, and top-selling author and Jack Reacher creator Lee Child, and a whole lot more as well. So if you are enjoying this episode, then maybe leave us a rating and a review. Even better, the next time somebody asks what great podcasts you've been listening to, send them a link to The Art of Deciding. Out of that decision comes The Confessions of Franny Langton. And you get critical acclaim for the book. It sells really well. You do well out of it. Is there just one book in you? Or is there a tidal wave about to be unleashed?
For a long time, I thought there was just one book in me. But really, I thought there was just one go around with the publishing process in me, because although Franny did very well, the process of having a book published is not for the faint-hearted. It is, in fact, a lot more cutthroat in many ways in the world of corporate law, which is inhabited by sharks.
What?
So that's telling you
What?
something. In fact, I also spent quite a lot of time wrestling with the decision about what my second book should be, because one of the hardest decisions, well, for me anyway, in writing is picking that idea, fixing on the thing that you're going to spend all that time with, wrestling into shape, because there are so many ideas. And I was distracted for a very long time by an idea about a cult. I was going to write a novel about a cult, and I started it. And I wasn't in love with it. This feeling you get when you know an idea is good, which is akin to the feeling of falling in love, that it grabs hold of you, it won't let go, it wakes you up at night, it makes your tummy feel funny, you're just obsessed with it. And I didn't have that feeling about, my sort of attempted second novel. It was work. I was approaching it like work. I was dragging myself to it. I was trying to make it happen. And then along the way, I was sort of hyping myself up by listening to a Jay-Z album. And this thing just grabbed hold of me. It's like that physical, you've got a crush on someone and you can feel it in your bones. And I started reading around the subject of hip hop and how hip hop had come to be in the 90s. And there was my second book, which is well underway, and I am in love with it. And so working on it actually does start to feel joyful rather than like a chore.
And isn't it wonderful, though, that you go from 19th century slavery into the 21st century? It's a huge leap, and it's driven by what excites you and interests you, rather
Correct.
than this need for a formula which is repeatable and therefore becomes more secure from an income perspective. But you're doing what you want to do, and in that comes
Correct.
a power that is probably, is it a characterization that goes across Booker Prize nominees potentially, that they're writing about things that truly matter, not the things that are going to earn a living?
I think that is such an astute question, and absolutely in my case. In fact, sort of harking back to the theme of your podcast, it was a decision. I had to tune out the voices that were saying to me it would be a lot easier and commercially viable to repeat the formula of the thing that worked. But the authors I admire, and as you say, the authors who are more likely to win the Booker Prize are the authors who are going where their psyche and imagination and psychology take them, where the events of the world that they live in are taking them. Authors like Margaret Atwood and Toni Morrison never wrote the same book twice. And so, although in a way, it seems like there's no decision being made if you're just going where your instinct pulls you or where that feeling of falling in love pulls you. In fact, you are deciding to be that kind of writer. And I think part of that is deciding to be that kind of person. So someone who's engaged in the world for more than commercial reasons, who's engaged in the world for the reasons which drive me to write, trying to understand it, trying to see how other people understand it, and trying to find those moments of connection about that.
If you're enjoying this podcast, you might also enjoy The We Society. From education to the economy, the grand challenges facing our society remain as pressing as ever. Should we switch to a 4-day working week? Is education the key to social mobility? How can we unlock the productivity problem? That's why I'm recommending you give The We Society a listen. It's hosted by journalist and author Will Hutton, and each episode features expert guests sharing their big ideas for changing the way we live. Why not make The We Society your next listen? After this one, of course. Available now on Spotify, Apple, and all good podcast platforms. Take me back then to Booker and to a controversial choice about a book that is set on the space station. And some of the critics of the judging process have gone, it's really a story there. It's just people pottering about on the space station doing space station-y things. It's really a book. How difficult was it getting to that final choice?
It depends on where you're looking for story. I mean, some people are looking for the kinds of stories where things blow up and people chase each other with guns. And you can make a Booker book of that. I mean, there was an excellent book on the shortlist, Creation Lake by Rachel Kushner, which was essentially a spy caper. But story can also happen on the level of the sentence. There can be such marvelous tension just in two people in a room talking, or one person in a room feeling lonely. I was in love with Orbital from the minute I read it, stayed in love with it throughout the entire judging process, and only loved it more after we chose it unanimously. And I feel like that kind of criticism is missing the point, which is that all stories are in this book. It really is. I've described it as a miraculous book, and I think it is miraculous. It is so small, but yet it is really taking aim at, and this is going to sound cheesy, but I think in a way all great literature is trying to do this cheesy thing of answering the question, what it means and feels like to be human, to live on this earth, to love it, but also to be part of destroying it, to love each other, but also have to lose each other, to love each other, but also be lonely. Great literature asks these questions. I really do think that Orbital is a book that we need now, but will also need forever. And that it was really the obvious and only choice actually for our Booker judging year.
However, in getting to that process was an enormous amount of disagreement. And you also talk about the importance of disagreement in getting to the best possible collective decision. Take me through the thinking of that, please, as to why that tension has to happen and how it can be contained?
Well, I think disagreement's different from tension in a way. I mean, if by tension you mean hostility, I mean, in a way, that's how we've set up our legal system in this sort of English-speaking world, that you channel that tension by having it kind of professionally manifested through the arguments of qualified lawyers, and then someone sort of sits in judgment on that. A certain amount of that kind of tension is necessary to arrive at a decision that has interrogated all possibilities and that has kind of looked at all angles of something. So you want the differing opinion, you want the naysayer. Their opinions have to be ventilated in order for the decision to have kind of scoured all available data, if you like, to put it scientifically.
It's a high stakes decision. It's a decision that can make a career or diminish a writer's confidence, perhaps. The people who came second and third
Mm.
don't get quite the accolades of the person who wins. When it comes down to distilling to just one, there's disagreement, there's friction. Is there emotion involved in this process? Is there a sense of like, oh, I wish we could give it to this one, but this one must win? How does it work?
Yes, selecting Orbital as our winner was the easiest decision we made, but you're absolutely right that the process of deciding on a winner was not without emotional difficulty. For a start, there was this sense of obligation I talked about, knowing how important the prize was, knowing that it's a prize that has the power to change a novelist's career, and that we would be conferring that kind of advantage, sprinkling that magic on one person and leaving out equally deserving writers, just really, really filled us with agony. And I remember that feeling on the day of the absolute difficulty of having to leave behind the books on the shortlist that we had fallen in love with, that were excellent books, and that we knew in another universe, in an alternate universe, were Booker winners. And in fact, this plagues me. I really hope it plagues other people with this decision making, that, when you have to choose between equally good outcomes, that you are sort of for a very long time haunted by the outcome that you've left behind.
You share the agony of decision making with a former chairman of the Bank of England in Sir Brad Freed, who says he finds the burden on his soul of decision making agonizing. And they're making, multi-million-pound decisions on a daily basis. And that agony of decision making, that uncertainty as to whether this was the right call. Ultimately, while it was painful, I suspect, for you to leave books on the side, you were all convinced that in this very, very difficult field, this was the only one that made sense that you could all agree upon.
I am so grateful to learn that I'm in such illustrious company, because I always think that I must be a secret wimp or something. I mean, I really do feel the agony acutely. There's some kind of sort of quantum physics or quantum mechanics thing where you wish, that there was a universe where you could make each of the decisions and have them play out. Recently, I had to choose between publishing houses for my second novel. And I spent the day after the decision feeling really depressed about one in particular I couldn't go with, because there is only one universe and things have to play out in this one. Luckily, the Booker decision is one that we make and then we become completely and instantly and immediately obsolete. No one cares about the judges once the winner has been announced, and you can leave it behind. With a decision that you have to live with and work with, i.e. a publishing house, I think it's really important to feel that agony for a minute, but then latch into the decision you've made and make it work and appreciate why you made it. What are the advantages? What is it about this decision? You really do have to feel the regret and then move on with the decision you've made, as if that had always been the only one.
Would you, if you were invited again, be a Booker Prize judge?
Oh my goodness, in a heartbeat. In fact, one of the things I regret is that it's not a lifetime appointment. I absolutely loved it, loved the whole process. Apart from maybe that little wrinkle, the agony of having to leave someone out. I should have been a kindergarten teacher, because in kindergarten, everyone gets a prize.
Everyone wins. And it's a snapshot in time, I suspect. It depends on what we're going through in our own lives, what the world is going through. Next year's Booker Prize winner will be influenced by fundamentally different global conditions to the conditions under which you made your decision.
And completely different personalities as well, which makes it so exciting. Now, having been behind the curtain in the process, I'm even more excited to see how a different world and a different panel, comes up with their own book. And one, as you say, that it's something of a snapshot of the time in which it was chosen and the people by whom it was chosen.
Try and create a safe environment, a free space where you can be yourself. And disagree if you have to. That's essential in making the choice. Using the differences of opinion to test all the possibilities. And then telling stories, whether we're writers or not. We all have a narrative that we tell the world, and we tell ourselves. How can that be at its most effective? At its most persuasive? Find a story that you're completely in love with, that gives you butterflies. Anything else runs the risk of failing. Decide what has to be in there and what can't be left out. Then let everything else flow from there. And once you've made a choice and have ruled out other things, feel the agony for a minute, but then be at peace with it. Move on with the decision you've made as if that is the only one. Oh, and life is short. Remember that. Sara Collins, Art of Deciding. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Art of Deciding. You'll find us on all the major podcast platforms, so please click follow so that you don't miss an episode. I'm Bruce Whitfield. You can find out more about me on brucewhitfield.com. Till the next time, bye-bye.